Complete panic and chaos in Hawaii after that emergency alert sounded across the islands just after 8 a.m. local time. Residents seen running for cover, families hiding in bomb shelters. Take a listen.
This is not a drill. Take immediate action measure.
The dire warning of a ballistic missile threat buzzing on cell phones stripped across television screens. Residents told to seek immediate shelter. Quote, "This is not a drill." It took 38 minutes for some people to get the all clear. The message, a human error, false alarm. And it comes just weeks after Hawaii reinstated a Cold War era missile alert system in the event of an attack by North Korea following Kim Jong-un's repeated tests. In Hawaii tonight, the governor saying an employee at shift change is to blame. But there are so many questions still, and ABC's Stephanie Ramos starts us off from the Pentagon.
Hawaiians fleeing after waking up this morning to a nightmare scenario. The message sent at 8:07 this morning on TV, radios, and this message going out on cell phones reading, "Ballistic missile threat inbound. Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill." The warnings left an entire state terrified.
We were up on a mountain and we almost fell off of it trying to get to our children.
People pulling over in tunnels, confused tourists hunkering down in hotels.
People are hiding in tunnels, people are locking down their homes, they're heading for the mountains.
One mother saying her daughter was away at a slumber party when the alert went out.
And so she calls me because they're all getting the alert and she's like, "Mom, what are we supposed to do?" And I'm like, all right, stay there. If something happens, no matter what, do not leave that house.
Families filling up their bathtubs with water and stocking up on supplies. The people of Hawaii have been on edge in recent months as North Korea's Kim Jong-un moves closer to perfecting a nuclear-tipped missile. Just last month, Hawaii tested their nuclear attack warning sirens for the first time since the 1980s. But this alert was not real. 12 minutes after the alert, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard was the first public official to say this is a false alarm in a tweet. NORAD and Pacific Command, with assets in place to detect a missile approaching, saw the state had not corrected the alert, so they clarified, saying the message was sent in error. But Hawaiian officials didn't send out that correction message statewide for 38 minutes.
This should not have happened.
The state's governor says this false alarm was a result of human error.
It was a procedure that occurs at the change of shift where they go through to make sure that the system is working and an employee pushed the wrong button.
But tonight, many are asking, why did it take so long for a correction to go out?
We need to work on the response time. If anything like this happens, the cancellation got to go right away.
Definitely some very big questions right now. And Stephanie joins us live from the Pentagon, where you've been speaking to military brass all day. Stephanie, those warning systems are controlled by federal agencies, but tonight the blame is being placed squarely on Hawaii.
Absolutely, Cecilia. The state's warning system is a FEMA capability. Whoever has the alerting authority, either state or local, can push out those alert messages. Now, a source here at the Pentagon tells me today's false alert was a pure mistake by the Hawaii Emergency Alert System. Cecilia?
Stephanie Ramos leading us off tonight. Thank you. And while human error may be to blame, the chaos and confusion in Hawaii today seem to reveal a system not ready for the real thing. I want to bring in ABC News contributor and retired Marine Colonel Stephen Ganyard. Steve, as you have talked about so many times before, the threat from North Korea obviously very real, but people today clearly did not know what to do.
Cecilia, this reaction, this panic that we saw in Hawaii probably never would have happened just a few months ago. But now that we've seen North Korea demonstrate a nuclear capability, threaten the United States with nuclear war, we need to go back to the future, go back to those Cold War days when we took civil defense seriously and make sure that our warning systems are in place, that they work, and we can't have a problem like we had today that was based on a simple human error.
A big problem there. Colonel Ganyard, thank you.
President Trump's national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, is reportedly pushing for a military strike on North Korea that could have devastating consequences. Here's RT's Dan Cohen with more.
For months, National Security Advisor Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster has been advocating a so-called bloody nose strike on North Korea.
Are we looking at a preemptive strike? Are you trying to prepare us, you being collectively the administration and people like Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton, for a first strike at North Korea?
Well, what you're asking is are we preparing plans for a preventive war, right? A war that would prevent North Korea from threatening the United States with a nuclear weapon. And the president's been very clear about it. He said he's not going to tolerate.
Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson reportedly are opposed to attacking North Korea. I spoke to journalist Gareth Porter about the human toll of such a war.
We're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of civilians killed, thousands, even tens of thousands of U.S. troops possibly being casualties of a war that the United States would start in this way.
Porter explained McMaster's advocacy as part of a militaristic and neoconservative worldview.
What he does is to create a picture of the world that is a complete exaggeration in terms of the potential threat to U.S. interests. And so he's latched himself on to this worldview that suggests, and it's a very right-wing neoconservative worldview, that suggests that the United States is under pressure from revisionist powers, of course, including Russia and China.
McMaster has a track record of leading military operations that failed to achieve their stated goal. He earned a reputation as a hero when he led the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment into the Iraqi city of Tal Afar in 2005. A year later, Tal Afar was awash in sectarian violence that had engulfed much of Iraq. It became one of the first cities to be overtaken by ISIS and was only liberated by the Iraqi army in 2017. Under the Obama administration, McMaster led a task force that, quote, sought to root out the rampant corruption that had taken hold in the U.S.-backed government. That effort ended in near total failure. McMaster has failed his way to a top position in the Trump administration. With a nuclear-armed North Korea, the stakes are higher than ever.
Everyone who has really closely examined this phenomenon of McMaster's whispering campaign believes that this is a bluff. This is a way of trying to convince the North Koreans and the Chinese, who are in some ways even more important a target of this campaign, to basically give in to the U.S. demand that they come to the table without, of course, having any assurance that the United States will give up its demand for the denuclearization of North Korea. And that's simply not a realistic prospect.
It's a high-stakes gamble and a scenario straight out of the Cold War classic film, Dr. Strangelove.
We would destroy 90% of their nuclear capabilities. We would therefore prevail and suffer only modest and acceptable civilian casualties.
We know how that movie ends. In Washington, Dan Cohen, RT.
Palestinian president calling President Trump's Middle East peace plan a slap in the face, saying they will slap back. This comes after the president announced plans to move the U.S. embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Connor Powell joins me from Jerusalem with the latest. Hi, Connor.
Yeah, Arthel, President Trump recently threatened to cut U.S. financial assistance to the Palestinians after frustration at the slow start of restarting peace talks between Israelis and Palestinians. That threat looks a lot closer to becoming a reality now. President Trump making some comments here in the last few days that could really happen. The administration looks like it could cut hundreds, if not tens of millions of dollars. But Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas speaking out tonight in a fiery speech from Ramallah, calling President Trump's Middle East peace plan a, quote, slap in the face, but also adding that Palestinians will slap back as well. This is just the latest in growing tensions between Israelis and Palestinians and the White House following that move by President Trump to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. That move upending decades of international efforts to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through a negotiated settlement. The big question right now is if the United States does cut funding, what type of impact does that have on not only the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinians, but also Israel? There are many in the Israeli security services, Arthel, that do not want to see the U.S. cut funding to the Palestinians because they work hand in hand with the Israelis on security cooperation. There's a lot of political support here in Israel from Prime Minister Netanyahu and others to cut that funding. But among the security services, there's a real fear that that could force the collapse of the Palestinian Authority and could really escalate the security problems here, not only in the West Bank, but in Gaza and also in neighboring Jordan. That's something that the Israeli security services do not want to see. So you have a fight between the Palestinians and President Trump, Arthel, but also between the Israeli government, the politicians, and also the security services here.
Yeah, very much an entangled situation over there, Connor Powell.
7 News. And for this next report, I wanted to bring you guys an update concerning the United States as well as Russia and China. This first report comes from Express News, and they are reporting that Russia's explosive war games have sparked fears of a potential war looming as thousands of troops have simulated a deadly attack during huge military drills. Here's that report. Huge explosions are seen in some of the photos, blasting sand from the beach as fireballs erupted. Troops were seen testing out UR-77 meteorite mine clearing systems or working with an array of pistols and guns. And flares filled the air with smoke as soldiers advanced on their targets under the cover of the thick black fumes. The drills involved more than 1,000 soldiers, including the engineer and sapper units of the Russian Navy's Baltic Fleet. And the military exercises comes amid concern Russia could be preparing to launch an attack. Fears of preparations for an invasion have repeatedly been dismissed by the Kremlin, but observers are concerned Russia is not telling the truth about the true number of troops taking part in the country's multiple drills. Just days ago, Rio Terras, the commander of the Estonian Defense Forces, revealed Russian President Putin's forces simulated a large-scale military attack against NATO last September. He claimed the war games were so the superpower could prepare to move a large number of troops at extremely short notice if it were to go to war with the U.S.-led organization. Other leading figures have voiced similar concerns that Mr. Putin could be preparing for war with Europe and the USA. The Supreme Allied Commander of NATO stated it's following in line with what we've seen with these annual exercises in the past. They're usually very large. They're usually initially defensive in nature, but also have an offensive portion thereafter that looks to me like a rehearsal of an attack. That's worrisome if you're a NATO country on the border. Seems Russia is definitely preparing for a conflict, and Russia is not the only one preparing for war these days. I have a report here from Newsweek, and they are reporting that China has blasted its own military for being paralyzed by peace. People's Liberation Army criticized its own military personnel for being paralyzed by peace as China ramped up preparations for war. This week, a PLA Daily report blasted its own soldiers for refusing to face the possibility of war, blaming the recent period of peace for paralyzing the current generation of troops. War is not far from us. Regional situations around China are complex, unstable, and dangers are hiding under the peace. China cannot afford a military failure, so we must be fully aware of potential crisis and be prepared for battle at all times, stated the official newspaper. On Thursday, the Chinese president called for the military to demonstrate heroism and fighting spirit to safeguard the Communist Party's interests at the second session of the 19th Central Commission for Discipline Inspection of the CPC. That same day, the official military news site warned its soldiers to prepare for imminent threats and to avoid complacency as it began intense training to ready the country for battle. This follows the enormous military assembly on January 3rd, at which the Chinese president told his troops not to fear hardship or death and issued instructions to its forces to begin real combat training for all three branches of the military: the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. Since the president's speech, China's most advanced military aircraft has been conducting extreme exercises. It goes on further to state that a retired general said the likelihood that China would be forced to engage in military conflict has increased over the past few years. In regions like the Korean Peninsula, China-India border area, and the Taiwan Straits, the PLA needs to be prepared for all possibilities. Our overseas interests in regions like Africa and the Middle East are also under threat due to local instability. And China and Russia aren't the only ones that have been busy lately. I have a report here from Fox News, and they are reporting that the United States Air Force announced that it has deployed 3 nuclear-capable B-2 stealth bombers and 200 personnel to Guam, sending a strong signal to North Korea just a few days after its talks with the South. Here's that report. The B-2s join a number of B-1 conventional bombers already deployed on the Pacific Island. It is unclear how long the B-2s will stay at Andersen Air Force Base in Guam. General Kenneth McKenzie has stated that the bomber deployment is part of an ongoing planned deployment that affects not only the Korean Peninsula, but also the broader alliance structure in the Pacific. You'd be wrong if you viewed a bomber deployment in a single lens of what it means to the Korean Peninsula. It affects allies across the Pacific. So when we begin to talk deconfliction of activities more directly related to the peninsula, there's where you could see why we have chosen to deconflict and adjust the timing of some of those activities because of the Olympics. The Air Force last sent a lone B-2 bomber to Guam in October, but only for a few hours as part of a long-range training mission from its home base in Missouri. The last time the U.S. sent 3 of the stealth bombers to Guam was January of 2017. And the Daily Star is reporting that the U.S. Navy will mount a laser weapon onto a top-class warship, says defense officials. Top Navy officials said the device is slated to be installed on the USS Portland by this autumn. Crucially, the prototype will not be used in combat, but may pave the way for high-tech lasers that will be used during warfare. Captain Brian Metcalf stated that they've got what I call power modules that control the laser that will just fit in those open and reserved weight spaces, and then the laser itself gets bolted onto the deck. It's not going to be integrated into the warfare system. It won't be providing tracking data or classification data. The ship is going to use the thing, and then we'll start talking about how do you make this part of the ship's total systems. He also added, but for now it's a bolt-on. It's designed to be a temporary thing. The U.S. has pumped billions into its military and Navy over fears it could go to war with China. And finally, it goes on to report that Zhang Yancheng stated that the country's tense relationship risks throwing the world into a harrowing nuclear conflict. He said a key issue for 2018 is whether we can avoid international conflicts and confrontation, and the relationship between China and the U.S. will largely decide if the world can move past the current globalization interlude. Wars and rumors.
It's hard to imagine just a week ago, homes stood here. This is a neighborhood on the outskirts of Kinshasa. When floodwaters came gushing down from a nearby river, many people didn't even have a chance to rescue their loved ones and belongings. Mansala Soleil shows me what remains of the 2-bedroom house he shared with his wife and 3 children. He says he knows he should take his family to higher, safer ground, but they're still here, despite the obvious danger.
I am afraid because it's still raining, but I don't have any money to move them. We got no help from anyone. Moving from here means renting a house.
The rains are expected to continue for the next 3 months, and this means more trouble for a country that is facing a cholera outbreak, the worst in 2 decades. About 1,000 people have died since last year. More than 50,000 from across the country have so far been affected. The government has declared cholera a national emergency and set up treatment centers.
The government has set up this facility here in Kaluka, the most affected area in the city. We're not allowed to go to the wards where the patients are because of the nature of the disease. Since November, at least 30 people, mostly children, have died in Kinshasa alone.
Cholera is highly infectious, also easy to treat if detected early, but with a poor health system and financial problems, doctors are overwhelmed. A government international appeal for $8 million has not helped. Less than $2 million has been raised.
Only few countries in Africa can deal with a situation like this by themselves.
This is why the government launched an appeal for help in November and declared cholera a national disaster.
So here, health workers focus on prevention, talking to anyone they can about the importance of good hygiene and visiting centers like this one early enough. They are preparing themselves for more difficult times ahead in this rainy season.